And Jeremy, I know you've been looking through the questions. You want to have had a chance to gather the last few ones. We could have Brenda pop in there, but we'd like to just see any questions that the audience has directed towards Ben, Nick, or Jeremy.
Yeah, I can get us kick-started, and Joe, if you or Brenda see something for me, you can plug that here. But I had a few that I noted in the queue. Folks are asking about, this, we hear this a lot about this bank dwelling versus dam building beaver. So Nick, you touched on that, but is there really any biological difference in beavers that build dams versus lodge in the banks?
Yeah, so do these beavers that build bank dens, are they have the capability of building beaver dams? And some people think of these as behaviors that are totally independent, but Mark McKinstry, who's kind of pioneered a lot of the relocation techniques, has released bank den beavers, and has found that they immediately start building dams and systems where they need to alter their environment. So there's no genetic component or learned behavioral component. They can build bank dens and they can build beaver dams.
Excellent.
Jeremy, just to real quick piggyback, I mean, it's just survival, water depth. They can swim. When they've got depth and they can get away with living in a bank, everything's good. When they don't, they've got to modify it to make the water deeper. So I think that's, survival is a pretty key driver.
Absolutely. Thank you. Ben, while we got you here, I want to put you on the spot a little bit and talk about this shifting baseline concept. Somebody called it amnesia. The fact that we forget what happened 200 years ago, the trapping history and this fur desert policy and stuff like that. Do you find, or did you find when you were researching your book, maybe it's beaver denialism, where people say because they're not here in my watershed today, they never occurred here? Did you encounter that? You're giving lots of talks about this, and you finding that people say, well, they don't occur in California naturally, or whatever.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that California is the perfect example of that. That's a state where beavers were, historically considered a non-native species throughout much of the state in Southern California, much of the Bay Area, and elsewhere, in the high Sierras, and really, in defiance of logic and biology, they were considered non-native because they were trapped out so early there that the notion of that we kind of internalized this notion of a beaverless system as natural. And thankfully, thanks to the wonderful work of a pretty interesting multidisciplinary coalition of historians, scientists, ecologists, lay people, a really amazing body of evidence was assembled that basically proved that beavers had been, of course, ubiquitous in California prior to European arrival, and that they were a native species. But I think that's a really telling example of how dramatically we can kind of get things wrong. And California still, the legacy is that the state's beaver policies are not nearly as progressive as they could be. I think because that conception of them as a non-native species casts a long shadow.
Yeah, thanks for that. That was good perspective, and appreciate your work researching this topic and really opening up my eyes to that historical context.
Yeah. Now you're an evangelist, man.
Oh, man. Yeah, I know. A trained evangelist, apparently.
That's it.
All right. Well, building off of that, Nick, I want to ask you about, you mentioned beavers need water and wood, but what about beavers and grasslands? Do they always need wood?
Well, there's several examples of beavers building dams in kind of grassland-like environments. They can live on herbaceous plants and if there's tubers and such that are available. If the system is kind of harsh in the wintertime, that maybe it could be more difficult for them to store that kind of material. But they do need some material to keep their incisors from growing. And I know there's a lot of grasses that can help with that, sedges and such. But I don't know how they keep those incisors from growing in those systems. I don't know if they chew on some gravel or whatever, but they do seem to make it in a lot of grassland systems.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. I guess I'll take this one. I saw a question in the queue about, can beavers work with livestock? And the short answer is yes. In fact, it's been funny. When I give presentations on this to diverse groups, I'll often have ranchers run up to me afterwards and kind of secretly tell me, I love having beavers on my ranch. They do a lot of partnering with beaver that we don't even know about. And so I would say there's lots of examples of this out there where folks have realized the value that beavers provide, and they're learning to manage their livestock operation in combination with that. And Ben has some examples of those ranchers highlighted in his book, and we'll talk more tomorrow morning actually about an example from Nevada. Folks like I see Sherm Swanson from UNR's on, and Carol Evans from the BLM, and John Griggs, Maggie Creek Ranch in northern Nevada, have probably one of the greatest shining star examples of how good grazing management plus beaver equals amazing ecological outcomes. Were there any other questions that you guys saw, or topics that weren't asked about that you guys would like to speak about, Joe or Ben or Nick?
Or yeah, I'd also be curious, Brenda, if you saw anything there, because you've got a little bit of distance from this, a lot of experience on the wetland side. So if there's anything that popped out to you as well.
I think that I was allowing you guys to select those questions at this point. So there were some questions early on that I was really interested, but I think that Jeremy caught those, so I'm all set.
Yeah, I see another one here that I think is asked a lot about, and back to Nick, this question about beaver relocation success that folks have heard it can be low. What's the scoop on beaver relocation, translocation, and what can we do to improve the success of that?
Yeah, studies have shown that the success of getting beavers established in a particular location, even if you're doing a lot of the right things, is maybe 50%. That doesn't mean that the beaver you put out there aren't surviving. It might mean that they do get killed by predators, but it might mean they just are getting up and moving. So some things to increase the success, we believe, are to release them as a family unit. They're quite social, so just releasing one, of course, releasing one into a watershed that has no beavers is only going to have a limited effect. So you're going to have to release a beaver with the opposite sex, and so you have to pair them up if you don't capture a family unit. But if you can capture a family unit where you have the entire family unit, there's a lot higher likelihood that they're going to stick around. But something that we're finding is building them some BDAs and building them in maybe a few different locations so they can pick which one really suits the place where they want to make their new home. That provides them a lot of protection from predators. But it's still tough. I mean, we have game cams on some of the places where we've relocated beavers, and even if there's a BDA, and we see more mountain lions and bears in those game cans than the beavers we relocated. So it can be tough in places where there are a lot of predators. But once beavers do get established, create a big enough pond complex system, they tend to start to radiate out from there. And so sometimes it's the luck of the draw of when you get those things released and when a predator happens to be walking by.
Yeah, great. I appreciate that. And I think the aha moment for me when you guys first introduced me to this concept was this idea that beaver need pools. They need deep water to escape that predation. And so dumping them into a shallow creek likely to be unsuccessful, but there's some things we can do to help increase our odds. Well, thank you to the afternoon presenters. That was fantastic. Joe, I'm going to turn it back to you to tee us up for tomorrow.